Rudolf Höss, architect of Auschwitz, the chilling story of a Nazi commandant. Welcome to Bytes, your destination for unraveling the lives of history's most fascinating and sometimes darkest figures. Here, we explore the untold stories and pivotal moments that shaped individuals who left a lasting impact, for better or worse. Subscribe now and journey with us through the lives that shaped history, one bite at a time. Rudolf Höss was born on November 25, 1900, in the picturesque town of Baden-Baden, Germany. From the very beginning, his life was shaped by the strong influence of his father, Franz Xaver Höss, a man who embodied discipline and structure. Franz was a former German army officer who had served in the distant colony of German East Africa, now part of modern-day Tanzania. Later, he returned to Germany to work as a senior clerk in a merchant house specializing in tea and coffee imports. The elder Höss was a strict, deeply religious Catholic, and his stern demeanor defined much of Rudolf's early upbringing. In their home, strict Catholic principles were the bedrock of family life, paired with a sense of military order that Franz instilled in his children. Rudolf's mother, Pauline Speck, provided a contrasting warmth, focusing her energy on raising Rudolf and his three sisters in what was outwardly a stable, upper-middle-class household. This family background, steeped in discipline and religious fervor, created a structured environment for young Rudolf. The Höss household was relatively prosperous, allowing Rudolf to enjoy the privileges of a comfortable upbringing. He later reminisced about his childhood with nostalgia, particularly his fondness for his horse, which he described as his closest companion during those early years. For a time, his life seemed like that of many children in upper-middle-class German families at the turn of the 20th century, defined by a sense of stability, routine, and deeply ingrained values. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic upbringing lay the foundations of a life that would eventually diverge into darkness. The early lessons of strict adherence to duty, combined with an unyielding religious framework, were shaping the boy who would one day become a pivotal figure in one of history's darkest chapters. Rudolf Höss's early education began in an environment that reflected the structured and disciplined nature of his upbringing. Initially, he was taught under the guidance of private tutors, receiving the kind of individualized attention often afforded to children in well-off families of the time. This was a prelude to his formal schooling, where he was later enrolled in an elementary school. Though capable, Rudolf's academic performance was not remarkable. He was a diligent student but showed no signs of extraordinary brilliance. His father, Franz Xaver Höss, had high hopes for his only son. Deeply rooted in their Catholic faith, Franz envisioned Rudolf pursuing a religious vocation and joining the priesthood. To this end, after completing elementary school, Rudolf was sent to a humanities school, a preparatory step that would have eventually led him toward a seminary. This path was intended to align with the strict religious principles that governed their household and to secure Rudolf's place within the church. However, this trajectory was abruptly disrupted in the early 1910s with the untimely death of Franz. The loss of his father not only dismantled the driving force behind his religious aspirations, but also marked a turning point in Rudolf's life. Without the influence of his father to steer him toward the priesthood, Rudolf began to chart a different course for himself. As he entered adolescence, a growing sense of nationalism began to take root in Germany. This was a period of heightened tension and pride, as the nation prepared itself amidst a simmering European power struggle. Like many young men of his time, Rudolf found himself drawn to the ideals of military service. The allure of a disciplined, purposeful life in the armed forces appealed to him, particularly in the absence of his father's guiding hand. Gradually, the dream of becoming a priest faded, replaced by an ambition to follow in his father's footsteps as a soldier. This shift reflected not only a personal decision, but also the broader currents of German society at the time, currents that were pushing many young men toward a life defined by duty, loyalty, and service to their country. For Rudolf, these formative years marked the beginning of his journey into a world shaped by military discipline and nationalist fervor, setting the stage for the path that would define his future. At the remarkably young age of just 14, Rudolf Höss embarked on a path that would profoundly shape his life. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 stirred a wave of nationalist fervor across Germany, and Rudolf, inspired by the same sentiments, and eager to embrace the ideals of duty and service, made the momentous decision to enlist in the German army. Despite his youth, he joined the 21st Reserve Squadron of the 2nd Baden Dragoon Regiment, a unit steeped in history, and one that both his father and grandfather had served in. After a brief period of initial training, Rudolph's unit was incorporated into the German Asia Corps. This specialized force was deployed to the Middle East, where it operated alongside the Ottoman Sixth Army, a principal ally of Germany. For a teenager, this was an extraordinary leap into the chaos of war, far from the structured discipline of his childhood or the spiritual aspirations his father had once envisioned for him. Between 1916 and 1918, Rudolf fought in the harsh and unforgiving landscapes of the Middle East, engaging in multiple campaigns across what is now Iraq and Palestine. These years exposed him to the brutal realities of combat, experiences that would leave indelible marks on his psyche. The war was not just a battle for survival, but also a stark confrontation with human suffering and the destructiveness of modern warfare. Rudolf was wounded several times during his service, a testament to the dangers he faced on the front lines. His injuries, however, did not deter him. Instead, they underscored his resilience and commitment to the cause. His courage and endurance were recognized through military commendations, including the prestigious Iron Cross Second Class, a decoration awarded for acts of bravery. Additionally, he received the Iron Crescent, a significant honor from the Ottoman government, reflecting the collaboration between the two powers. In a remarkable turn of events, by the spring of 1918, despite being just 17 years old, Rudolf was entrusted with command of his own cavalry unit. This responsibility was a rare honor for someone so young, signaling his aptitude for leadership and the trust placed in him by his superiors. For Rudolf Höss, the First World War was not merely a period of service, but a transformative chapter. It solidified his identity as a soldier, tested his resilience, and introduced him to the complexities of conflict and command. These experiences, forged in the crucible of war, would become a foundation upon which the rest of his life was built, shaping his future decisions and actions in profound ways. Rudolf Höss returned to Germany after the First World War, to a nation scarred by defeat, economic instability, and social upheaval. The war's end, marked by the 1918 armistice, was not the victorious conclusion many Germans had hoped for, but rather a bitter capitulation that brought with it the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles. For Rudolf, who had seen the war as a noble cause, the defeat and the resulting societal fractures struck deeply, leaving him restless and discontent. His personal life had also shifted dramatically during his years away. His mother had passed away, and he found himself increasingly at odds with his family. The path to priesthood, once laid out by his father, now felt distant and irrelevant. In its place, Rudolf gravitated toward a life defined by action and ideology, a reflection of the growing disillusionment felt by many returning soldiers. This discontent led him to join the Freikorps, a collection of paramilitary groups formed by veterans who sought to assert their vision of Germany amidst the chaos of the Weimar Republic. The Freikorps were not merely veterans' associations but organizations deeply involved in suppressing the worker strikes, uprisings, and political unrest that marked Germany's immediate post-war years. Rudolf threw himself into these activities, finding a new sense of purpose within the Freikorps' ranks. His time with the Freikorps was marked by involvement in violent and radical operations. In 1920, Rudolf participated in efforts to quell unrest in East Prussia. Shortly afterward, he was part of a brigade that violently suppressed a workers' strike in the Ruhr, a heavily industrialized region in western Germany. These experiences were not only formative for Rudolf, but also indicative of his growing alignment with extreme right-wing ideologies and his readiness to use violence to achieve political aims. The Freikorps embodied a vision of nationalism and militarism that resonated deeply with Rudolf. It provided a framework through which he could channel his frustrations and aspirations, even as Germany's societal divisions deepened. The camaraderie, the disciplined structure, and the shared belief in restoring Germany's perceived glory appealed to him profoundly. However, as the early 1920s progressed, the German government moved to disband the Freikorps, recognizing the potential threat these groups posed to the fragile stability of the Weimar Republic. For Rudolf, this dissolution marked another turning point. The radical ideologies he had absorbed during his time with the Freikorps did not dissipate, but became a central part of his worldview. With the Freikorps disbanded, Rudolf began to look for new avenues to pursue his beliefs, eventually leading him into the orbit of the nascent Nazi Party, a connection that would define the rest of his life. These post-war years were critical in shaping Rudolf Höss. The disillusionment, the violence, and the radical ideologies he embraced during this period set the stage for his eventual role in the atrocities that would define his legacy. His alignment with the Freikorps was not merely a reaction to a troubled time, but a prelude to a life steeped in extremism and unyielding obedience to authoritarian ideals. Rudolf Höss's alignment with radical ideologies deepened in the tumultuous aftermath of the First World War. In 1922, amidst the growing political instability and economic turmoil in Germany, he joined the National Socialist German Workers' Party, widely known as the Nazi Party. At the time, the Nazi Party was a small, fringe group, but it resonated with Rudolf's nationalist fervor and discontent with Germany's defeat in the war and the perceived humiliation inflicted by the Treaty of Versailles. The early years of Rudolf's association with the Nazi Party were marked by active participation in its militant activities. He was drawn to its promises of reclaiming Germany's lost pride and its authoritarian vision for national restoration. These activities took a violent turn when Rudolf became involved in acts of sabotage against the French and Belgian forces occupying the industrialized Ruhr region of Western Germany. His efforts included organized attacks designed to disrupt the occupying forces, reflecting the party's growing militancy and opposition to foreign presence on German soil. In a particularly dark chapter of his early political involvement, Rudolf was implicated in the murder of Walter Kadow, a local schoolteacher suspected of informing the French authorities about sabotage activities. The murder was carried out with the collaboration of others, including Martin Bormann, who would later become one of Adolf Hitler's closest aides. The killing occurred on a farm, and Rudolf's direct participation in this politically motivated act underscored his willingness to engage in extreme measures to support the Nazi cause. Rudolf was arrested and tried for his role in the murder. In 1923, he was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. This period of incarceration interrupted his early involvement with the Nazi Party, just as the party itself was gaining momentum under Adolf Hitler's leadership. While Rudolf was behind bars, Hitler attempted the ill-fated beer hall putsch in Munich, an attempted coup that led to Hitler's own imprisonment. Rudolf's time in prison was formative. It solidified his commitment to the ideology he had embraced and further radicalized his views. Despite being sentenced to a decade-long imprisonment, Rudolf served only 5 years, benefiting from leniency in the politically charged atmosphere of the late 1920s. He was released in the midst of a rapidly changing Germany, where the Great Depression and political instability were setting the stage for the Nazi Party's eventual rise to power. Rudolf Höss's early association with the Nazi Party laid the foundation for his future. His readiness to commit violence for ideological purposes and his unwavering belief in the party's principles foreshadowed the role he would play in the atrocities to come. These years were not merely a phase of political engagement, but a transformation that bound him to the Nazi movement and its ruthless pursuit of power. In 1929, Rudolf Höss began a new chapter in his personal life when he married Hedwig Hensel, a woman he met through the Ardeman League, a rural and agrarian movement that emphasized traditionalist values and a return to the land. This union marked a period of apparent stability for Rudolf, as he sought to establish a family and step back from the overtly militant and turbulent years of his early political life. Together, Rudolf and Hedwig had 5 children, creating what outwardly seemed like a conventional family life. During these years, Germany was undergoing dramatic changes. The Nazi Party, once a fringe political group, was gaining traction amidst the economic despair and societal unrest brought about by the Great Depression. While Rudolph focused on his family, his ideological ties to the Nazi Party remained intact. He watched from a distance as the party he had once joined as an obscure member rose to national prominence under Adolf Hitler's leadership. The year 1933 was a turning point, both for Germany and for Rudolph. Hitler's ascent to power and the establishment of a Nazi-controlled government reinvigorated Rudolph's political involvement. The ideology he had committed to a decade earlier was now transforming into state policy, and the opportunities to serve this regime were expanding. It was during this period that Rudolph reconnected with the Nazi movement in a more official capacity, joining the Schutzstaffel, or SS, in 1934. While his family life provided a veneer of normality, his re-entry into political life signaled a return to the path he had first embarked upon in the 1920s. Hedwig, though distanced from the ideological extremities of her husband's career, supported the stability and respectability his political alignment brought. As Rudolph began his rise within the SS hierarchy, he would maintain a dual existence, devoted family man on one side, and a staunch, increasingly influential operative of the Nazi regime on the other. This juxtaposition of personal warmth and ideological ruthlessness would define Rudolph's character. It created a chilling disconnect between the devoted father who cherished his family and the man who would later preside over some of the most horrifying atrocities in human history. These years were a harbinger of the duality that would come to define his infamy. In 1933, as Adolf Hitler consolidated his grip on Germany, Rudolf Höss made a pivotal decision that would shape the course of his life and forever etch his name in history. He joined the Schutzstaffel, or SS, a paramilitary organization that would become synonymous with the Nazi regime's most sinister activities. Aligning himself with Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, Höss entered a world driven by ideological zeal, authoritarian control, and a cold, calculated sense of duty. By 1934, Höss was assigned to Dachau, one of the earliest concentration camps established by the Nazi regime. There, under the mentorship of Theodor Eicke, who served as the camp inspector, Höss was immersed in a brutal system of discipline and control. Eicke's methods were unrelenting, prioritizing obedience and dehumanization. These principles became foundational to Höss's own approach to camp administration. At Dachau, he learned not only the operational aspects of managing a concentration camp, but also the psychological detachment required to enforce its grim protocols. Höss demonstrated an aptitude for the work, rising steadily within the SS hierarchy. His commitment to the system and his adherence to its harsh practices did not go unnoticed. By 1938, his trajectory led him to Sachsenhausen, a larger and more strategically significant concentration camp near Berlin. Here, Höss served as Commandant Deputy for Prisoner Affairs, a role that granted him significant authority over the lives of those imprisoned within the camp. His time at Sachsenhausen marked a further ascent in his career. Höss had honed his administrative skills and absorbed the ideology of the SS with chilling precision. He carried out his duties with an air of detachment, seeing the prisoners as mere cogs within a larger mechanism. This mindset, cultivated during his years at Dachau and Sachsenhausen, would prepare him for a future role of unparalleled infamy. As he rose through the ranks, Höss became a key figure in the SS's increasingly expansive and brutal network of concentration camps. His rise was emblematic of the Nazi regime's cold efficiency, where loyalty and the capacity to enforce its oppressive policies were rewarded. This period was a prelude to the horrors he would later oversee, as Höss's unwavering commitment to his superiors and the ideology they championed would place him at the center of the Holocaust's machinery of death. In the spring of 1940, Rudolf Höss assumed a role that would cast him as one of history's most infamous figures. Appointed as the Commandant of Auschwitz, he was tasked with transforming a modest Polish army barracks into a facility of control and oppression, under the Nazi regime. What began as a concentration camp for political prisoners and dissidents soon evolved into something far more horrifying under his command. Höss approached the project with a meticulous, almost clinical focus. His early work at Auschwitz included organizing its infrastructure, constructing barracks, and establishing systems for forced labor. Initially designed to hold approximately 10,000 prisoners, the camp's capacity quickly expanded as the Nazi regime's demands grew. Under his direction, the camp's operations became more structured and efficient, laying the groundwork for what was to come. The true turning point came in 1941 and 1942, when the Nazi leadership enacted the Final Solution, a systematic plan to exterminate Europe's Jewish population. Auschwitz was designated as a central site for this genocidal policy, owing to its strategic location, proximity to rail networks, and isolated setting. Höss played a pivotal role in adapting the camp to fulfill this gruesome directive. Auschwitz-Birkenau, also known as Auschwitz II, became the epicenter of this transformation. Höss oversaw the construction of gas chambers and crematoria, innovations that epitomized the industrialization of mass murder. Zyklon B, a cyanide-based pesticide, was introduced as the primary agent for killing prisoners. Tests on its lethality had already been conducted under his supervision, and soon it was deployed on an unprecedented scale. Trains began arriving at Auschwitz loaded with victims, men, women, and children. Höss orchestrated the logistics of this mass extermination with chilling precision. Prisoners deemed unfit for labor were sent directly to the gas chambers, often within hours of arrival. Their belongings were confiscated, their bodies cremated, and their ashes discarded with mechanical efficiency. For those spared immediate execution, life at the camp was marked by starvation, forced labor, and brutal conditions that often led to death within weeks. Höss's administration at Auschwitz epitomized the cold, calculated cruelty of the Nazi regime. By the end of his tenure as commandant, the camp had become a vast machine of death. Under his watch, over 1 million people, the majority of them Jews, were systematically murdered. Höss carried out his role with an unwavering sense of duty to the SS and its ideology, cementing his place as a central figure in one of history's darkest chapters. The transformation of Auschwitz from a concentration camp to a site of mass extermination was not just a logistical or architectural project, it was a manifestation of a deeply dehumanizing ideology. Höss's role in this process was not merely administrative, but pivotal, embodying the grim efficiency and moral void at the heart of the Holocaust. Rudolf Höss stood at the very heart of one of history's most devastating atrocities. As the Commandant of Auschwitz, he was a key architect in the machinery of the Holocaust. This was not merely a position of administration, it was a role in orchestrating genocide on an unprecedented scale. Höss managed the logistics of mass murder with an unsettling detachment, ensuring the camp functioned as a systematic engine of death. From the early days of his tenure, Höss was instrumental in the transformation of Auschwitz into a primary site of the Final Solution. With the expansion of Auschwitz-Birkenau, gas chambers and crematoria became the central tools of extermination. Under his command, these facilities were designed to process thousands of lives each day in what became a grotesque assembly line of death. Trainloads of victims, predominantly Jews from across Nazi-occupied Europe, arrived daily. Entire families were separated, with most sent directly to the gas chambers upon arrival, their fate decided within minutes. Höss personally oversaw the efficiency of these operations, ensuring that Auschwitz met the objectives laid out by the Nazi regime. He was deeply involved in the introduction of Zyklon B as the primary method of execution, a grim innovation that allowed for the murder of large groups in a matter of minutes. The remains of the victims were burned in crematoria or disposed of in open-air pits when the capacity of the camp's facilities was overwhelmed. The scale of the suffering under Höss's watch is almost incomprehensible. Over 1 million men, women, and children were killed at Auschwitz during his command. The victims were not limited to Jews. Political dissidents, Romani people, Jehovah's Witnesses, disabled individuals, and Soviet prisoners of war also faced systematic extermination. The camp's operations were coldly efficient, stripping individuals of their humanity in every conceivable way before extinguishing their lives. Höss approached his role with a chilling lack of emotion, often describing his duties in bureaucratic terms, as though it were merely a matter of fulfilling orders. Survivors and witnesses have recounted his detached demeanor, his focus on ensuring that the camp ran smoothly, and his unrelenting adherence to the ideology of the SS. His role was not one of passive complicity, but of active participation, directing the mechanisms of genocide with precision. The enormity of Höss's crimes is a stark reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink when ideologies of hate and dehumanization are allowed to take root. His actions at Auschwitz remain a profound and haunting symbol of the Holocaust, a period in history that stands as a testament to both the capacity for evil and the necessity of remembrance. Rudolf Höss's role at Auschwitz was momentarily interrupted, but his commitment to the Nazi agenda never wavered. In late 1943, he was reassigned from his command at Auschwitz, following investigations into corruption among senior SS officers stationed there. Although Höss himself was not directly implicated in these scandals, the combination of this situation and an extramarital affair led to his temporary transfer. During this time, he served as Chief of Department DI within the SS Economic Administrative Main Office, overseeing administrative functions across the broader concentration camp system. This shift did not signify an end to his involvement in the Holocaust. By the spring of 1944, Höss returned to Auschwitz, this time to oversee one of the most horrific chapters of its history, the extermination of Hungarian Jews. Under his direction, the camp was prepared to handle the massive influx of prisoners following Germany's invasion of Hungary. Over the course of just a few months, nearly 400,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz. The majority were murdered within hours of arrival, their bodies disposed of with a grim efficiency that had been refined during Höss's earlier tenure. The summer of 1944 saw the peak of the killing operations at Auschwitz-Birkenau, with trains arriving daily, each carrying thousands of men, women, and children to their deaths. Höss played a central role in what became known as Action Höss, the systematic annihilation of Hungary's Jewish population. To manage the influx, additional crematoria were constructed, and open-air burnings were used when the capacity of these facilities was exceeded. As the war turned decisively against Nazi Germany, Höss was reassigned once more, this time to Berlin. There, he took on broader responsibilities related to the SS and its operations across the diminishing territories still under Nazi control. His involvement in the machinery of death extended beyond Auschwitz, as he provided logistical support and expertise to other camps and operations. With the collapse of the Third Reich in 1945, Höss went into hiding, adopting a false identity to evade capture. However, the shadow of his crimes loomed large, and the Allies were determined to bring key figures like him to justice. Despite his efforts to disappear, Höss's activities during this period were a continuation of his unwavering commitment to the genocidal mission of the Nazi regime. His role in the Holocaust did not end with his departure from Auschwitz. Rather, it persisted in various forms until the bitter end of the war. Rudolf Höss's capture and trial marked the culmination of his years as a key figure in one of history's darkest chapters. After the collapse of Nazi Germany in 1945, Höss adopted a false identity, posing as a farmer named Fritz Lang in an attempt to evade justice. For months he lived in relative obscurity, moving between hiding places in the chaos of post-war Germany. However, his past could not remain concealed indefinitely. In early 1946, the British Field Security Police apprehended Höss near the German-Danish border, acting on information obtained during the interrogation of his wife Hedwig. His arrest came almost a year after the war's end. Initially denying his identity, Höss was betrayed by the inscription on his wedding ring. Following his capture, he attempted to bite into a cyanide capsule to end his own life, but was unsuccessful. Under interrogation, Höss confessed to his role in the Holocaust, recounting the operations at Auschwitz with chilling detachment. His testimony, delivered at the Nuremberg trials, provided some of the most detailed and damning accounts of the industrialized mass murder carried out during the Holocaust. He described the logistics of Auschwitz with a clinical precision, detailing the development of the gas chambers, the use of Zyklon B, and the disposal of victims' bodies. Despite the horrific nature of his admissions, Höss showed no remorse, presenting his actions as the fulfillment of orders from superiors like Heinrich Himmler. After his testimony at Nuremberg, Höss was extradited to Poland to face trial in Warsaw. The proceedings, conducted by the Polish Supreme National Tribunal, were closely watched by the world. Witnesses, including survivors of Auschwitz and former camp staff, testified against him, painting a grim picture of his tenure as commandant. Höss himself maintained a demeanor of detachment, offering detailed responses to accusations, but consistently deflecting personal responsibility by claiming he had been following orders. On April 2, 1947, the tribunal handed down its verdict. Höss was found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death. His trial and subsequent conviction served as a grim acknowledgement of the atrocities committed at Auschwitz under his command. In his final days, Höss reportedly sought solace in religion, returning to the Roman Catholic Church and receiving the sacrament of penance. However, these gestures did little to mitigate the weight of his actions. On April 16, 1947, Rudolf Höss was executed by hanging near the crematorium at Auschwitz, the site where he had presided over the deaths of more than 1 million innocent people. His death closed a chapter on one of the central figures of the Holocaust, but left behind a legacy of unimaginable horror and a stark reminder of the depths to which human beings can sink when driven by ideology and blind obedience. Rudolf Höss met his end on April 16, 1947, in a manner fittingly close to the epicenter of his crimes. Sentenced to death for his pivotal role in orchestrating the Holocaust, he was executed by hanging at a site near Auschwitz, the very camp where he had overseen the mass extermination of more than 1 million people. The gallows were constructed adjacent to the former crematorium in Auschwitz I, a haunting reminder of the atrocities committed under his command. At precisely 8:10 a.m., the execution was carried out, marking the end of the man who had directed one of history's most horrific killing machines. In his final days, Höss attempted to reconcile with his actions in ways that seemed hollow against the backdrop of his crimes. He sought absolution through the Roman Catholic Church, receiving the sacrament of penance, and penned letters to his family, expressing a mix of resignation and attempts at remorse. However, these gestures did little to offset the enormity of his guilt or the impact of his legacy. Höss left behind a chilling autobiography, written during his imprisonment at the insistence of his captors. Unlike typical autobiographies that celebrate achievements, Höss's account stands as a macabre document of methodical genocide. With unflinching detail, he described the inner workings of Auschwitz, the development of its gas chambers, and the logistics of mass murder. His writings provide historians with invaluable first-hand insights into the Holocaust's operational details, yet they also reveal a man devoid of genuine remorse, presenting his actions as the clinical execution of orders. The legacy of Rudolf Höss is inextricably tied to Auschwitz, which has since become a symbol of the Holocaust's horrors. Today, Auschwitz is preserved as a museum and memorial, drawing millions of visitors annually who seek to understand and confront the depths of human cruelty. Höss's execution and the testimonies he left behind stand as both a grim reminder and a crucial record of the atrocities committed under his watch, ensuring that the memory of those who perished is never forgotten. His life and actions are a stark warning of the consequences of blind obedience, ideological extremism, and the dehumanization of others. Rudolf Höss stands as a chilling embodiment of the banality of evil, a term coined to describe the unsettling ease with which ordinary individuals can commit extraordinary atrocities under the guise of duty and ideology. As the Commandant of Auschwitz, Höss demonstrated a cold, bureaucratic efficiency in his role, managing the logistics of genocide with a level of detachment that belied the unimaginable scale of human suffering he orchestrated. His meticulous attention to detail and unwavering loyalty to the Nazi cause allowed him to facilitate the mass extermination of over 1 million people, including Jews, political prisoners, and other marginalized groups. Despite his clinical approach, Höss's actions were deeply rooted in the dehumanizing ideology of the Nazi regime. His unflinching adherence to orders and absence of genuine remorse underscore the profound dangers of ideological extremism and blind obedience. Höss's life serves as a grim testament to how individuals can become instruments of unimaginable evil, perpetuating atrocities through a combination of systematic planning and moral abdication. Even in death, Höss remains one of history's most infamous war criminals, a figure whose legacy is a cautionary tale about the potential for cruelty that lies within human systems when unchallenged. His autobiography, trial testimonies, and the very existence of Auschwitz as a preserved site of memory ensure that the horrors he helped to perpetrate are neither forgotten nor diminished by time. Thank you for watching Bytes, where we delve into the lives that shaped history, for better or worse. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content. Remember, history is more than dates and events. It's a lesson for today and tomorrow. See you in the next video.